Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we will be talking about horror culture, which could involve sensitive subjects. You know, the bad things like child abuse, rape, F-bombs, things that could be sensitive. Therefore, we have to do this disclaimer, and with that
Just
out of the
case.
way. That is the disclaimer when we talk about bad things and good things. It's a fun podcast. Let's see. What do we have in the neighborhood of announcements or things coming up, Steve?
Quite a bit, actually. So, well, by the time this airs, who knows what's going to happen? But Twitter seems to be continuing its death throes. So if you go to our horrormakesushappy.com on the main page, there is a link to our Discord. You can feel free to join us over there. For self-promotional stuff, I've created a coupon code for my book, A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox. If you go to smashwords.com, the coupon code is LE69E, and
Nice.
you can purchase it for, you can purchase it for 99 cents. You can also check out Chris's webcomic at pieces-compendium.com.
Or piecesofflesh.com if you don't know how to put dashes in URLs. You know, that's a tough thing.
That is also an opportunity, yes.
Piecesofflesh.com.
Yes. As far as what's on the calendar, also too much to list. We've got, I think, like 10 authors, a director, an actor. Today we're talking to Professor Tim Waggoner. Later this afternoon we'll be speaking to Lisa Morton, also from
StokerCon.
Yes.
There you go.
So lots of stuff on the calendar.
Yeah, lots of stuff. But as you briefly mentioned a moment ago, today we have with us Mr. Professor Tim Waggoner, author of 50 or more novels, close to 200 short stories, 5 tie-in novels for the Supernatural TV universe, and a Stargate SG-1 universe, SG-1 Valhalla. He also wrote the movie novelization of Halloween Kills and was nominated
Award winner.
4-time award winner for the Bram Stoker Award. That is a lot. That is quite a resume, sir.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I don't know how much we discussed offline, but the general theme of the interview actually is less about your work and more about your actual interest in the horror genre, what you're a fan of. We go through 4 stages, basically, talking about childhood, adolescence, and teenage years and adulthood, and then like a wrap-up section at the end where we cover any reoccurring themes that may have come up. That said, it's not meant to be a therapy session, so if there's anything that you don't answer, just say pass and we'll move on. But starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
The very, very first one is my dad used to read me dinosaur books we get out of the library.
Huh.
And, I'd sit in his lap, and I was probably 3 or 4, and I couldn't read. I didn't understand how anybody could read. I told him it must be some kind of magic of the eyeballs because I couldn't figure it out. But I learned how to recognize the names of dinosaurs from their shape because I was so fascinated with these things. And then I had like a recurring dream that a flying saucer landed in the cul-de-sac where we lived. And it was cool because the dream was all like crimson light. And then it opened up and dinosaurs came out. And so that was like my first kind of horror scenario, I guess, I created.
That's cool.
But then when I was around that same age, back then, because I'm 59, so we're talking probably 1968 or something, the stuff that would show up on TV was pretty safe for anybody to watch in terms of horror. And so my folks let me watch Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. And I'll never forget it because I was fascinated. I guess I knew that these monsters existed, but the fact that they existed in the same universe and could meet just freaked me out. I thought it was awesome. And so I made my dad teach me how to draw the Wolfman. He taught me a little simple way to do it I can still do. And so, that's where it really all began with me. There's also one of my earliest memories is my mom taking me around. I probably wasn't even a year old, but I swear I remember this. It was Halloween, and she took me out for trick or treat. She dressed me in this little pink bunny onesie and took me up to the neighbors just to sort of like show me off or whatever. And I had no idea what was going on. There were all these, I think I recognized them as kids, but they were all in these weird costumes running around, and people were the adults were making a fuss over them. I had no idea what was happening. I think most of us probably spent having no idea what's going on. But it was just like obviously an impactful thing because I still remember it all these years.
Hmm.
So that first Halloween also made a big impact on me.
Okay. Have you listened to the show before, sir? Because we just went through like 4 questions in a row. like early scary memories, scary dreams. Oh yeah, and by the way, Halloween.
Yeah. Those are the ones. And then I remember being a little bit older, fascinated with the guy who wrote Clifford the Big Red Dog, Nelson Bridwell, wrote a couple books, how to train your monster.
Huh.
And it was about if you're going to have a monster for a pet, like a vampire or a mummy, because there's different sections on all of them, just what it was like. And the idea that you're like, I could have a monster for a pet, I thought was great. I traded a kid a bunch of baseball cards so I could get that.
Can relate to trading cards and also early fears of dinosaurs. I blame Jurassic Park.
That'll do it.
Right. That's like a real fear because people are dumb and will do dumb things. So that could actually happen.
Yeah.
The things that you've already mentioned here, they all seem obviously positive and pleasant. Some of our guests have reported there being sort of a dividing line where prior to that they were scared and then after that they found pleasure in horror. Was there anything that did scare you that you remember, or was it all positive from the very start?
Yeah, not a dividing line, but it was opposite. Horror was all just fun for me until a certain point. One of the first points was, like a lot of kids my age who were into horror, I read Famous Monsters magazine. It was like the Bible for horror kids. And The Exorcist had come out. And of course, there was all this, hype about it. It was a cultural phenomenon. Didn't see it, but they had a picture in Famous Monsters magazine, and it was one of the pictures where Reagan's head is like turned all the way backwards. And the hype of it, knowing that this was like such a big deal and looking at that and trying to imagine what it would feel like to have my head turned backwards, it's actually made me throw up. And it was just because of the anxiety of it. I did it to myself. And so I cut the picture out and got rid of it. And, because as a kid, I was like, this picture's, look what it did to me. And I told my great grandmother who was there, and she's like, well, we got to get rid of it. And I'm and at the time, even then, I'm like, you did this to yourself, you dumbass. You know that, right? But still, that happened. And then I was about 9. My great uncle passed away, and he was like a second father to me. And it was the first relative that I knew, and died that I really knew of. Right. And that had a huge impact on me. And I was watching a horror movie. I think it was Earth versus the Spider not too long after that. Just, an old black and white, not particularly expensive, made a horror movie. But this giant spider, we don't see it go through this little desert town and ransack it, but you kind of hear it and you kind of see the aftermath. And part of that is this little kid who's blonde and wore glasses just like I did, and one of his lenses is cracked. And he's sobbing. And I realized at that moment that monsters killed people and made them feel the way I felt when my uncle died. And it just changed everything for me because it shifted my view from look at that monster, isn't that cool, to look at the victim and what's happened to them.
I wonder if that had anything to do with the fact that he looked like you. Can you identify with the character more? Yeah,
I think it probably did. I really do. And then not too long after that, I almost drowned on vacation. Matter of fact, it was 50 years ago this summer, and just a few days ago, I returned to that lake for the first time. Because I'm like, it's the 50th anniversary. I'm just going to go say screw you to that lake since I survived. But almost, having that sort of 1-2 whammy of, a relative dying and then maybe I wouldn't have died, but in my mind, I thought I was going to die if I hadn't been pulled out because I couldn't swim. It really changed a lot. And I started to veer away from horror for a while. Once I hit like junior high, I started getting into comic books and superhero comics. And I still would read like a lot of the horror comics that were out, like Tomb of Dracula from Marvel and Werewolf by Night and all that. But it wasn't the same. My focus on horror wasn't the same after a certain point.
That's not uncommon. We have talked to other guests who veered away from it and came back later in life. Funny, you hit another one of our common questions about, if whether or not something in real life actually terrified you. So there's that. Interesting that you said that you couldn't swim. Have you learned to swim since then?
Sort of, enough so I probably won't drown.
Right.
Well, my wife was on a swim team as a kid and was scouted for the Olympics, so I got her to save me. And I also made sure both of my daughters had swimming lessons from the time they were like 1. So they can both swim like fishes. So that's my revenge on the lake. And the lake's never getting my kids.
Right.
There you go. No, that's good kind of revenge. Progressive.
Yes. Did you have
that shows
anybody...
up in my fiction a lot, the drowning or water and stuff like that. So it's had a big impact on my work too.
Well, write what you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was there anybody in your family who was a fan of horror?
My dad liked all kinds of speculative fiction, science fiction the most, some fantasy, some horror. And so I would read whatever books he had lying around. And so I would read a lot of science fiction, but I really gravitated more to the fantasy and horror whenever I, was there. It just stimulated my imagination more.
Going back to Halloween for a second, you mentioned the memory of the childhood in the onesies. Did you have a favorite costume in childhood?
Anything that was a monster. Okay. If it wasn't a monster, I didn't want it. I always wondered why people would even bother like dressing up like a cowboy or a princess. I'm like, this is Halloween.
Right?
Everybody should be a monster. Yeah. So, as I got older, I realized that it's really cool that people can dress up like anything because Halloween's the only holiday dedicated to the imagination. You can be whatever you want on Halloween.
Right.
If you want to dress up like Barbie, whatever, go for it. It doesn't matter. I bet there'll probably be a lot of Barbies after the new movie comes out.
I was just thinking that.
But yeah, so I would, always wanted to be like Frankenstein or the Wolfman or Dracula.
Did you ever do the classic mummy with toilet paper?
That's a good question to ever do. One year, I'm not religious, but some of my relatives went to a Quaker church, Friends Church, in our town, and they had this was back before when you could do this, when the church would have a Halloween party in the basement. I mean, one year the pastor came dressed as Satan with this giant Satan head, and everybody thought it was hysterical. It was back when people. I mean, I don't know if that would be everywhere, but at least in my little community for that church, people didn't think that it was just fun. They didn't worry about it. But one year when I was older, I dressed up as a prop, kind of. I was wrapped up as a mummy with like a stake through my heart. And the little kids would come up and poke at me and see if I was alive or not. And of course, some of them poked pretty hard, and I did not react. But
then when it was time wow,
yeah. And then when it was time to do the unmasking, they got to see that I really wasn't a prop. So that was a lot of fun.
The pastor thing, yeah, that wouldn't go today because you'd have that prop up on social media, and that pastor would be canceled ASAP.
Yep. Canceled. Yep. All you'd need is one person without a sense of humor with a phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you already answered your least favorite costume would have been anything that wasn't a monster.
Yep.
Other than the flying saucer one, did you have any other reoccurring dreams in your childhood?
Yeah, I had one. It's really weird, but I had one where I probably was like late junior high, maybe. I don't know. Around in there. And in the dream, our cat was up on the roof. And in the dream, I was worried, like the cat can't get off the roof by itself. But in the dream, I was worried it couldn't. So I tried to coax it to come down and I was going to catch it. And the cat kind of hesitated and finally jumped. And as it came down toward my face, it was in slow motion and everything went black. And then it repeated with the cat jumping, same thing. And then it repeated again with the cat jumping. And then that was it. And then I don't know how long after that, it started to happen. Everything. In the dream, and every feeling and thought I had in real life was what I had in the dream. I just didn't recognize it yet. Mm-hmm. And the cat, just as the cat was about to jump, I remembered. And so I, put out my hand and, with my palm out, told the cat, stop. And the cat looked shocked. And I had a feeling like the entire universe tilted to the left and then tilted back to the right, and everything felt okay. And I looked behind me and I saw that my dad, because we lived in the country and my dad would sometimes have like stuff lying around. Like there were some metal rods like right behind me that I might have landed on if the cat had come down on my face. Mm. So instead I ran and got a can of cat food, put it in the shed next to the roof, and the cat jumped onto it. Mm. But that's the most like dramatic recurring dream I had.
It is very involved.
Yeah. And it was like I said, it was really weird. So I don't know what it was. Who knows? Maybe people have memories that, you have an experience now, and in your mind, you think that you somehow remembered it from before. I'm not saying it was a legitimate psychic experience or whatever, but it sure felt like it at the time.
It's very interesting because it's very similar to something that I have said in the past, but yours is a much clearer example of what I wasn't able to describe. And what I mean by that is that I used to get deja vu feelings a lot when I was a kid as well. And at some point, I did connect that I would experience those feelings on days when something either really good or really bad happened at some other point in the day. Like the dream that I had was not related to what happened, good or bad, but it was something else that happened on the same day. And so that if I had a deja vu feeling, but nothing good or bad had happened, I was walking on eggshells for the rest of the day because that was like my warning. And so it's very interesting that you had something happen literally like back to back where you were able to identify this could have been the bad outcome. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's the only one I had like that. I had like little snatches of life that I would dream that would come true. Most boring things imaginable. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm washing dishes today. You know, it would be like 30 seconds of me washing dishes.
Yeah. I remember the only one I remember was I was walking past some house and I looked over at the flowers in front of the house. Like,
yeah.
Anyway. Other than the drowning experience, anything else actually terrify you in real life as a child?
Before my uncle died, I used to spend weekends over at his house, you know, my great aunt and my great grandmother's house. And since they were, I don't know why, since they were old, they knew a lot of people who died. And so they took me to a lot of viewings, which was really strange. It was really strange being this little kid going to viewings of people I had no idea who they were and being around that kind of grief. It wasn't scary exactly, but it was hard.
Yeah.
And then and all three, like my uncle, my aunt, my great grandmother, kind of all went in a row over the space of a few years, and so that was kind of rough. And so having that sort of because he died of like a heart attack just instantly, but the other two died of cancer, and so any kind of like body thing like that could happen to me kind of bothered me. And then when I was 31, I did have cancer. I had testicular cancer. And they caught it early enough that I was fine. You know, surgery took care of it. And, you know, it's like nothing ever happened to me. But I was diagnosed. And then 4 days later, on a Memorial Day, I had surgery. And evidently, according to one of my doctors, I had like PTSD from it because I couldn't process any of those emotions. It happened so fast. And my first daughter was only a few months old. And the most frightening thing was I was terrified of leaving her. You know, I just had her. I didn't want to leave her without a dad.
Right.
And then so like about not quite 10 years later, I started having panic attacks and things like that. And then once I sort of, with the help of doctors, you know, figured out what was going on, I got better. But for a while there, I was like just waiting for anything to go wrong with my body, especially when the kids were little. I mean, they're both grown up now. So if I keel over dead, it doesn't matter. I'm not afraid of like leaving them like I was, you know, or just not being able to fulfill my, you know, my responsibility as a dad to them. So I found that, you know, super terrifying, and it was a lot to work through. But hopefully, I'm been on the other side of it for a while now. I feel a lot better about it.
That's good. Yeah, my father unfortunately had lymphoma that he put into remission 3 times, and that's one of the kinds that can't cure it. It's you just put it into remission. Fortunately / unfortunately, he did end up passing away, but not due to that. Flipping that last question around, was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I went in my room, like playing with, I guess they weren't exactly action figures back then, playing with like, you know, the little plastic dinosaurs and plastic army men and stuff like that, and making up stories for them. In my aunt and uncle's, it was their basement. I could go down and play. And I even had like my own mad scientist lab down there, you know, with just these little plastic juice bottles that they're washed out, and I used to pretend like I was mixing chemicals. And so just having time like that alone with my imagination, reading books, reading comics, whatever, I always felt safe with that kind of thing. Always.
The first time that I learned that other people made quote unquote rat poison with like household chemicals, that I wasn't the only kid that did that. I was just like, what? I think that's everything that I wanted to ask for the childhood section. Let's move into teen section. So you mentioned Tomb of Dracula. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
You did say that you kind of veered away from it, but in terms of, if not horror, then at least maybe scary stuff. Do you remember a couple things that stick out to you from your teenage years?
Oh yeah, I mean, I still would go to every horror movie. It just wasn't like the focus. It was like everything was a great big mix. And comics really impacted me in such a way because you'd read Spider-Man and one week, or month, Spider-Man's fighting a supervillain. But the next month it's a crime organization. And the next month it's vampires from the future, anything. And it's just this weird eclecticism. You just never knew what the hell you were going to get.
Right.
And before there was any kind of like choice in television, we just had 3 or 4 channels and you watched what you watched. And so you would get a crime show followed by a science fiction show, followed by a news show or something. And so our whole experience was one of just all these genres and elements just all stirred up together. And I think it's no wonder where you see a lot of writers of my generation. It's kind of how they write, where it's just all this stuff that we draw on. And, even if we intend it to be, we think it's a horror story, by the time it's done, it's really just what they kind of call weird fiction, where it's a bunch of stuff mixed up together. But yeah, I read all the Marvel comics and loved every single one of them. Marvel also had some black and white horror magazines. One of them was, I forget what it was called, Dracula Lives or Tomb of Dracula. I'm looking off to my left there because I've still got the issue. But it was, I read it when I was 17, I think, 16 or 17. And it had an interview with Stephen King right after he had done The Shining. So, he wasn't super famous or rich yet. So he would have an interview in a comic book, And I read this whole thing, and it was the very first time that it clicked for me that a person could choose to be a writer. I knew that there were names on these books. I knew there were writers. I just never thought about like a person like me could choose. And I was reading it down in my bedroom, and I wandered down the hall in the family room my mom was, and I told her that, I think I might like to be a writer. And without missing a beat, she said, I think you'd be a really good one. And so who knows, I probably still would have ended up doing this, but you never know. So reading that horror magazine with that interview with Stephen King, it definitely planted that seed. There's no doubt.
Nice. Yeah, I wonder if it was the Dracula Lives one that was black and white, because I think I had copies of Tomb of Dracula, and that one I think was color. I didn't know that Marvel did black and white, though. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah. They had Tales of the Zombie. I like that one a lot. It was, since the way they tried to do from the zombie's point of view is they wrote it in second person. Since the zombie, and he was a regular person and was killed, and he's not a flesh-munching zombie. They hadn't picked up in popularity yet. He was a voodoo zombie, so just like a robot that people could control. But they would say things like, you stand in the rain and you can't feel it hit your face, and stuff like that. And I just found that fascinating, and I still use second person every once in a while in my stories.
Anything that do you remember anything that actually scared you, though? Or was it all still enjoyment up until, what was the thing that you said that was the trigger?
Well, it's hard for people that are younger. It's hard to explain to them the impact that some of the movies had coming out. So it's impossible to explain the impact of seeing Star Wars for the first time or Indiana Jones for the first time. But for me, one of the big ones was seeing Jaws. This is preteen. I was like in 5th grade. But from the way the TV ads made Jaws look like, there's no internet to check out. You would just see a commercial on TV, see an ad in the paper maybe. It just looked like an adventure story with, a monster. So I was all set. And I had never experienced that level of suspense in my life. And I was absolutely terrified. It didn't help that I'd almost drowned a few years earlier. So I was terrified the whole time. And then at the very end, when the shark jumps up on the boat to eat Quint, and I'm looking at this shark and his jaw, his lower jaw is not like matching up to his upper. It's kind of sliding side to side as he's chewing. And I was like, you can see the teeth of rubber too, like when they come down to bite Robert Shaw.
Oh, I know. That's one of the worst parts. You can see it bend.
Yeah. And I was like, I could not believe I was afraid of this thing for so long. And I burst out in hysterical laughter and literally fell out of my chair onto the floor of the movie theater and kept laughing. I ruined that goddamn movie for everybody in the theater. But like a lot of people around that time, suddenly I was, afraid of water, just the thought of it. The idea that you can't see what's there, anything could be there. And it's a wonderful metaphor for horror and a wonderful metaphor for just like the dangers in life and the things we worry about that we just don't know is there. And then when the original Halloween came out, I had never seen any kind of intense horror movie like that. The ones you saw on TV were always, they were always sanitized for your protection. They had scenes cut out or whatever, or just didn't show up. And I went with my sister's boyfriend at the time, and it was a small little theater in the neighborhood, and I was terrified. And then there were some young girls in front of us, younger than us, and they would scream as soon as something happened. And then my friend, he laughed. And then I was like, wait a minute. I suddenly understood something, that I understood that the reactions were kind of the same, but it was a thrill ride. I kind of felt it at that point. And then I just loved the rest of the movie, and it was fine. But I didn't have that same sort of, I am terrified by the suspense of what might occur. It was more like, oh, it's a cool surprise coming up. And so it really changed how I viewed movies. And so after that, I really wasn't scared, going to see movies. I would be much more scared by ones that would have really bad implications for characters. Like one of the worst endings I've ever seen in terms of terrifying or horrifying is the end of Being John Malkovich. Because once you understand, they don't tell you, but once you see the ending and you put it together on what's awaiting this character, what he has to wait, like, who knows what, 10, 20, 30 years for, it's just awful. It is absolutely horrifying. And so that kind of thing still can take me by surprise and just wallop me. But like regular horror movies, no, I don't get scared of them. Although when I saw the Babadook, the first time it said Babadook, Duke, I had a little chill. I was like, ugh.
That was a little chilling. Yeah, that was very effective. And yeah, same on John Malkovich, because that's just like, it's more than horror or terror. It's the dread of knowing that you're imprisoned in another person for the rest of your life, or actually for the rest of their life.
Right. And that eventually, you'll end up moving into your daughter or whatever, or something. Yeah. I forget exactly, but yeah, it was awful. It was awful.
Horror in your teens, or not horror,
Halloween in your teens.
Thank you.
Yeah, we stopped doing stuff, going trick-or-treating around that time, and people didn't really have Halloween parties, at least none of my friends. So, and I lived out in the country, so nobody came trick-or-treating to our house. So Halloween just kind of went away. I think the last time we went I was probably a freshman, and it was like trying to go through the motions to recapture something that you couldn't. It just felt kind of hollow and purposeless. And about the only thing I remember is going into this one guy's house. He was on the phone, and he just had a big bowl of candy, and he just like, take one of each. And I thought that's what he meant. What he really meant was take one apiece. And so I was like taking candy from the thing, just several.
What are you doing?
Yeah, well, he ran over and he grabbed my wrist really hard and yelled at me, and it was pretty scary.
Wow. Well, it's it's appropriate for Halloween. It's scary.
Yeah. The weirdest Halloween, I was an adult taking my oldest daughter around. We had just moved to the town where I'm at now. I grew up in this general area, but I was away for 20 years before I came back to teach. And we had bought a house. My wife was pregnant with our second daughter, so she was on bed rest, so she wasn't allowed to come down. We didn't quite buy it sight unseen, but close. And as I got to know the neighborhood, I was like, oh shit, what the hell did I do? Because there would be like a cage next to a house that looked like it had wolves in it. And we went to this one guy's house and knocked on the door. He was sitting like in his underwear on a stool in an empty room with newspapers scattered on the floor. And there was just like some candy to get. And I was just like, we're moving. You're moving the hell out of this place. And so it's just like this idea that you could be invited into somebody's house, or you just don't know what's behind these facades. You see a couple movies, I can't remember the names of them specifically, but there are movies where, somebody is talking to somebody else and they don't know there's like a dead body right there because they can't see it. Or like, on the other side of the door, they've got somebody captured and they're just talking normally. And so there's that sense, again, you just don't know what's behind the veneer. That is really frightening. It kind of reminded me that, or maybe think of like the veneer with water. It's the same way like people's doors, like their houses, or facades or veneers, and you just don't know what you might find by going in. And so trick-or-treating is kind of it really can put you at risk in a lot of ways, especially when you just let the kids run around When I grew up, kids just ran all over the place. They just turned you out in the morning and they figured you'd be home for dinner and then turn you out again and you'd be home before dark or after dark. They didn't care. And I don't know how any of us survived. But just that idea of the veneer, from kind of got to me or settled in me in high school when it came to trick-or-treating too. Seemed a lot less benign. I think too that I was talking to this with, I forget who, maybe my wife, but whether she was saying, well, that's when the milk cartons with the kids on them started showing up to remind everybody that, this is what could happen. And so I think maybe people were just becoming a lot more aware of that sort of thing. So it was a big transition between just sort of, you're free to roam around everywhere and you're safe all the time, at least for kids in a suburb, because there are lots of kids that grew up in places in the world where they know better right from the get-go.
Yeah.
But we're starting to feel like there was nowhere that was really safe.
Yeah, having a buddy system helps too. If you're with a group of friends, whether it's going for Halloween or doing anything, safety in numbers.
Yeah.
So no parties, that cancels the other two questions. Any recurring or scary dreams when you were a teen?
No, sometimes I would have dreams where I was trying to fly or levitate, but I don't know why. They had a really cool one once where I was a superhero, like Superman with a cape, and I flew up the side of a skyscraper. That was pretty cool. It wasn't a recurring one, but it was awesome. So I still remember it all these years later. I had a dream where my dad was a vampire. And it was so weird because he was in his chair in the family room, but he had his, like the stereotypical vampire slave girls that are kind of like, around his legs or whatever. How they can, and I was telling him he's my dad, and he's like, "No, I'm not your dad anymore." It's it's the kind of vampire where it's like a hollowed out vessel something else has got into.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times Stephen King, like in Pet Sematary, he wrote about it like that. He said it's like the dead bodies were like picking up radio signals from somewhere else. That was pretty scary, just because it was just so intense. But no, I can't think of any that were very scary. About the only one that I have. Oh, I did back then. I used to have dreams of the slow zombies before fast zombies showed up in movies. I had dreams of the slow zombies were coming, and what was scary about them is they never stopped. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't matter where you went. It was kind of like the movie It Follows. It doesn't matter where you went. Eventually, they were going to catch up to you.
Yeah, or Jason.
So I would have those. And then I started having dreams that somebody wanted to get into the house. Like I'd hear a noise, and I'd be wandering around the house trying to figure out who was there, what was there. And I still have them occasionally. I don't have them as much. Had them a lot when the girls were younger. Mm. So, but that's about it. I tend not to have a lot of dreams. I don't really remember my dreams much. Like a lot of people, once you get into adulthood, they're there. I know they are. I just don't remember them when I get out.
Right. I wonder if that's why it is. I always assumed it was copious amounts of marijuana, but I think as you get older, you just don't remember dreams as much because stress, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe. I did have a lot of dreams where I would find myself wandering through rooms and just talking to people like it was a big gathering or get together.
Like an occupational dream, not scary or inspiring or good. Just like, all right, I'm in this room talking to people. This is a dream?
Yep. And just wandering through different rooms. And in my mind, I sort of imagined I was going to like an academy at night, like a spiritual academy where I was talking to people or whatever.
Okay,
and
that's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. And I only found out this week that my youngest daughter has dreams like that all the time. And I was like,
interesting.
That's really weird. I said, it's cool. I told her I've had them, but I'd never talked about them around her before.
And what if you two were to meet each other in one of these meeting places? That'd be crazy.
That would be great. Especially if we remembered it, but
yeah.
The dreams about flying, I have read in the past that's a metaphor for wanting to escape.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I've heard they were supposed to be like sex dreams. It's a metaphor for sex for some reason.
Everything
I like
was
wanting to escape better. Yeah, I like wanting to escape a lot better.
Yeah.
Do you think that makes sense based on your teen years?
Maybe, just like a lot of, I had good friends. And even though we were the weird kids, in band and in drama club and, liked a bunch of weird stuff. And, liking weird stuff wasn't normal, more like it is now. It did, I didn't feel like I was out of place necessarily. But yeah, my home life wasn't great. My mom was a depressive agoraphobic, and she would have like days where she'd be almost like catatonic, wouldn't talk to you. And then she'd have better days. But that was hard to live with. And my dad was always about, like, don't make any noise or upset your mom. She was overweight, so nobody could ever say the word fat or anything that related to that. If somebody would make a joke like that in a sitcom, we'd all freeze. And she also had, it was never diagnosed what it was. It was just back then, they just called it spells. But she would pass out about once a month and fall and make these weird snoring noises. And we were just supposed to, Dad said when it happened, just go pat her hand until she gets, wakes up. And that was horrifying. For years, if I'd heard of like a big crash anywhere in the house, I would feel that again. But for years, I mean, I would literally have like a punch to the gut kind of feeling if I would hear it. So, yeah, I could see wanting to. And of course, being a teen, I didn't want anybody to know this. And it wasn't a time when people talked about mental health the way they did now. They didn't have antidepressants the way they do now. Doctor gave her Valium like that was supposed to help something. But so who knows? She passed away about 25 years ago, maybe. So who knows if she, lived, maybe they would have found, some good help for her, or modern kind of therapy and meds would have helped. But yeah, trying to escape that sort of feeling. It's like this weight that was there all the time. Sure, I can see wanting to escape that.
Yeah. The thing that you said about your mom passing out actually reminds me of something that I saw not that long ago, only maybe a couple of weeks ago, where I guess there is a form of seizure that is very much like what you just described. The video I saw was taken from like a monitor that was in somebody's kitchen, and it was a woman with 2 children, and the mother was basically passing out like this, and the kids had to go basically slap her on the back or in the face or something like that to wake her, snap her out of it. Mm-hmm. And the way you were talking about, patting her on the hand kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, and she says sometimes that it would be something she'd hear on TV that triggered it. She didn't know what, but that's what she thought. Or sometimes she'd feel them coming on so she could sit down, which would help, but not always. So I don't know. Yeah, the doctors just assumed it was some kind of form of epilepsy, but it was never diagnosed formally or was never treated.
Well, the next question on the list would have been whether or not you were terrified of something in real life as a teen. Some of the things that we've talked about kind of line up with that. Is there anything that comes off your mind that you want to add to that list, or have we covered enough on that topic?
It's a different boyfriend from the one I mentioned before, my sister. But one of my sister's boyfriends that during our teen years, she's like only 2 years younger than I am. They had a fight one night. He was over at the house and they had a fight, and he drove away upset, and he had a car crash and died. And it was near another friend's house, and he came over to tell my sister. And that whole night, friends were there, I was there, and trying to somehow, help comfort her. And how can you do that? You just can't. So that kind of thing. And it didn't help that one of the friends, I mean, he was in shock too, but he came over to explain to me, like, he didn't have a seatbelt on, the window was open, and when the car flipped, he came half out of the window, and he got hit or crunched or whatever here, and he like put his forearm across my chest, and I was just like, oh God. And I still can remember what that feels like to this day. So yeah, that whole experience was pretty rough. So that's still the fact that you might get something really bad happens in the middle of the night. I mean, probably everybody's had like the phone call from about a relative being hurt or dying or something, but having something that big, just occur like that, moments, or at least less than an hour, after that you see somebody, that was pretty rough.
Two rough things there, that and getting details that maybe you didn't necessarily need to know at that age.
Yeah, because it's not like you could find that kind of stuff on the internet, or, I hadn't seen a lot of movies where they simulated stuff like that. I mean, they existed, in the 70s and 80s. I just hadn't seen them.
Flipping that run around, a good time to ask, was there ever a time in your teens where you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
Usually like like with my friends, and like when we were in band or in drama club or times like that. Still reading. I started at the late junior high, started drawing like my own comic strip. I made my friends and myself bionic superheroes like the $6 Million Man. I put my friends in
Awesome.
it because I figured that they'd at least read it. I'd have some readers. I guess they'd read it because they read it. Because I wanted to be a comic book. Yeah, I wanted to be a comic book artist back then, and they always would talk about how terrible my art was, but how good the stories were. It made me mad because I only wrote the stories to have something to draw. But I really enjoyed doing that too, and just exploring different kinds of creative things. I felt good in art class. So those are the places where I felt most safe.
Okay.
Probably in a movie theater too, when the lights went down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, starting to see at least a few common themes. I mean, obviously the water stuff and the drowning stuff has come up a couple times. There's something else I saw, but it's escaping me at the moment.
Probably some like body horror stuff, just based on like the stuff with my mom, and then different things as I got older. I mean, I remember my great grandmother had cancer. They weren't going to tell the kids, but my aunt figured I was old enough, so she told me. And she said, she went in. My aunt or great grandmother went in for, I think, gallbladder surgery, gallstones, maybe. But my aunt told me they opened her up, and she was so full of cancer they just closed her up. And I just thought that was horrifying because it's like I understood that she was going to die, but it was just like they didn't even try or do anything, or I don't know. The idea they saw it and just closed her up just horrified me. So yeah, I think there's a strong kind of theme of body horror that goes on in my life.
Yeah, that was the other one that I was forgetting. That adds another item to the list, though. I was thinking about the funeral viewings. I think you had mentioned it during the funeral viewings. This thing that you just mentioned, did you say that was your grandmother or your aunt?
Yeah, great grandmother.
And
it's like a lot of families. It was weird because it's like some of the relatives would die younger and others would live forever. So my great grandmother was more like a grandmother to me in some way. They were like my second family because I spent time over there on the weekends.
Right. Moving into adult years, what are some of the, like, if you're going to pick 2, 3, 4 things that have really impacted you or stood out to you as really being important in your adult years in terms of the genre? Do you think, what comes to mind?
I remember one college where I was teaching part-time, I ran across Alone with the Horrors, like a retrospective collection of Ramsey Campbell short fiction. And reading that thing, it was just like, it's like in the Blues Brothers where the light comes down to the church. It was just, it was amazing. So my reading shifted over to reading a lot more horror and starting to become kind of like, almost like a scholar of it, studying it in a way I'd never done before.
Just to improve your own art?
Yeah, and just for the fascination of it, too. I just loved it so much.
Do you remember any particular stories that stood out to you?
There was one in Ramsey's collection. I can't remember the name of it, but kids were drawing graffiti of a god, and they called the god Popocatépetl, and so it was like an Aztec god or whatever. And the very end of it, it's stated pretty clearly, kind of implied, but mostly stated clearly that the little kids have been, having sex with this god. And it was just horrifying. It was just horrifying the way it was done. It's just the fact that the little kids could stumble across this, start worshiping this god, fall into this thing, be used the way they were.
Was it the fact that they were being used that was horrifying?
It was the kind of offhanded way. I think the very last line is a girl said, Popocatépetl did it to me too, and then she runs off. She told it to an adult. And it was just the way that it just kind of hit you like that. And where things sort of all kind of fell into place too. It's like, one of those stories where it's like somebody trying to crack a safe and the tumblers all click. And the fact that, some of the horror I was starting to read were, it wasn't just, and then the monster ate them. It was a lot more, this is the damage it's doing to somebody's mind or their psyche or their soul, or which I found was starting to find a lot more disturbing. And it's the kind of thing I started writing too because of that more. Even if it was supernatural based, there was still like ultimately an emotional or psychological, foundation to it.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around like when you say Popocatépetl did it to me too, was it because it was like a no one's safe thing, or like the breadth of...
I guess it was the kids like giving themselves to this thing because they had sort of, however they connected with it, they were doing all the rites for it. I think they were also leaving little sacrifices for it and whatever. That story is just, the idea. And that was back to when they had a little bit earlier, but one of Tom Hanks's first movies was Mazes and Monsters, where he was a dungeon master that went nuts, and so just the idea that your imagination, the thing that I love the most, could have a dark side.
Yeah,
that's kind of scary because I've got an imagination. What if my imagination started turning bad on me?
The very ending of that movie, I remember. I don't remember much about the entire movie, but the very ending of it, where he's either writing something or talking to somebody and says something about how he pays the innkeeper, this coin for his room every night, and every morning this magical wallet has another coin in it or something like that.
Right.
Like, I remember.
Yeah, the hospital where he's at. Yeah.
Yes, I was just like, oh,
mental hospital. Yeah.
It's funny that I don't remember any of the movie, but I remember that.
Yeah, I remember that too. I don't remember anything else.
Okay. Vulnerability is at least one topic that's come up. Any other stories, or whether it be books or movies or whatever in your adult years, that stands out to you?
Reading a ton of Stephen King, starting to read Charles Grant and Ramsey Campbell, discovering Joe Lansdale, and so many others, Tom Piccirilli and Douglas Clegg. So just all of that. And, starting to read like Cemetery Dance and some of the other magazines that kind of came and went. Yeah, and just really starting to become sort of subsumed in the, at least in terms of the art of written art of the horror culture at the time. Because I didn't know anything about conventions. I had no clue about them, no internet to connect to people yet like that. Yeah, so just a whole bunch. It was like, for me at that point, it's almost like I was in an ocean of all of this stuff.
Right. And so, for example, the last couple things that you've said there, you were listing authors, but not particular stories. And the reason that I'm asking about particular stories is because often, from a psychological standpoint, usually the things that come to mind first come to mind for a reason. And so I'm wondering what those first things that come, like, are there particular stories that come to mind?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, trying to maybe look for patterns. I mean, any kind of story where there's a loss of control, where there's nothing you can do. Poltergeist, I still use as an example all the time in workshops and things. Probably in the one that I did at StokerCon. Because the family is forced to deal with this stuff because their daughter is taken. And can you imagine a worse feeling of lack of control than your kid? Your kid's not even abducted somewhere on Earth. Your kid's in another damn dimension. How do you get there?
Yeah.
And in Pet Cemetery, you think you've brought back your kid, but it's not your kid. That kind of thing would always get to me. Like, it's the most obvious version of it is like, the pod people and the body snatchers, where it's just, they're not who you think they are. The people closest to you, that's like kind of the last veneer that you can get to, that the curtain, you don't know what's behind, is somebody's face. Because you just don't ever know what's in their mind.
It's the other.
Yeah, it's the worst thing of this I saw. It wasn't even a horror movie, but it's still one of my top 5 horror movie moments. Wallet being John Malkovich and that kid in the Spider movie was in a movie called The Last American Virgin, which I think was supposed to be a teen comedy, but didn't turn out that way. There's this guy who loves this unobtainable, or at least thinks he loves this unobtainable girl in high school. Her jock boyfriend gets her pregnant and dumps her. So the boy, sees her through her abortion and everything. And then they spend one night together, and he thinks, this is it. We bonded. We have a relationship. And then when he goes to the school the next day, she's in the hallway with her boyfriend, her old jock boyfriend. And she just looks at him with this cold look. And that's the end of the movie. And when I saw that, I'm like, I am staring into an abyss that I don't ever want to look into. And for me, it was horrifying, absolutely horrifying, that, he did all this stuff for her. I mean, not that she would like suddenly be in love with him, but just it like meant nothing. It meant absolutely nothing to her. He meant nothing to her. And it was just horrifying. So a lot of stories that
have life horror realization is.
And any story that has that kind of, you don't know what the people closest to you are like, or going to do, or what they could do. I mean, if you think about how intimate like sex is, I mean, it'd be really easy to kill somebody during sex if you wanted to. You have to be so close and, be so vulnerable. And then just emotionally, if you're going to really love somebody, those kind of vulnerabilities, I guess it still just goes back to vulnerability, like you said before, but those levels of it hit me in adulthood more because I was experiencing those things, in ways that I did not, as a much younger person.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in with what you'd said in a couple other spots too. Not only the Papa Kettle stuff, but also I think you had said something even about your own daughter that it's escaping me at the moment. But
yeah, it was rough. My first daughter was premature. My first wife or their mom, her water broke, but not all the way. So they had her on bed rest. They said, as long as you can hold off, they said, your daughter's almost done, but she's like cookies. We want to brown her some more. And yeah, and it was, that was lighthearted and fine, but still, it was a little rough few days. And then she was born premature, and we had to hook her up to a machine to, I guess their liver is not quite developed. And so she had to be in this machine that glowed. She was like X-Files baby for a few days.
Yeah, me too. I was born with jaundice, but they did have to put me in the light box with the Clydesdales things on the eyes.
Yeah, she had a little bit, but this thing just wrapped around her torso, so she didn't have to have anything on her eyes.
Oh, that's nice.
But yeah, she was fine. Other than that, little reflux for her first year. My second daughter had the cord around her neck. And the doctor, our pediatrician was wild. My first daughter, when she was born, he told my wife, he said, don't push. She pushed anyway, and my daughter shot out at an angle. And I watched this doctor stop time and he just said, okay. And he reached over and just plucked her out of the air. And I was like, what the hell? Because this is a guy who's delivered 1 billion babies, but that's what it looked like to me. And then we had Yep. And then we had the same doctor for the second one. And when he started to get worried, that's when I got worried. When my daughter's pulse was going down. I mean, he was going to grab a scalpel and go in to get her, and then she slipped away from the cord. But that feeling of absolute helplessness when there's just stuff you can't do. Once you have kids and you realize just how absolutely they depend on you and how absolutely fragile they are. I mean, they're tough too in ways you don't expect, but they're also fragile in ways that you don't expect either.
Yeah, they're a weird dichotomy.
That was really rough. Yeah, and that sense of helplessness, not being able to help your loved ones or the ones that depend on you so much, that was hard. It was rough. I mean, it was good. It's turned out good so far, but I still think, it's like the price for life. You have to want to live. You have to be willing to at least live with death because it's all out there. It's coming for us all. You have to find a way to make peace with it somehow.
And the only way to choose not to play the game is to meet it anyway. So,
so you're still doing the same thing. So you might as well live if you can. Yeah. For
Halloween as an adult, you mentioned taking your daughter around. Any other particular memories about Halloween other than that one?
Yeah, I didn't know they did this. It was really cool that my oldest daughter wanted to go to a haunted house. It was at this one school. I think it was a private Catholic school they did. And they would do whatever you would tell them before you went in, whether you wanted the scary version or the not so scary version. And so the people, they would just adjust. And so she asked for the not so scary version. It was still scary, but to her, but not so much. The people were just nice and kind. And I was like, this never occurred to me. This is a great idea, depending on the age of the people coming in.
Yeah.
I didn't go to too many haunted houses, but as a kid, my dad took us to one, and I think he probably knew the guy. There was a guy in a gorilla outfit, but he faced him down when the guy came after us. And I'm like, he's got to know that guy because this is not. It just seems too much. But it was still cool to have your dad, who not always the most. Yeah, he's not always the most emotionally present dad to do that. So that part was cool. My second wife had a lot of traumatic experiences in her past, but she wanted to try going to a haunted house. And I'm like, are you sure? And she said, yes. And we went on a haunted hayride. And of course, she screamed really loud. And so they targeted her as, okay, we got to go after the screamer. Mm-hmm. And they're not supposed to touch you, but they still did.
Oh.
And I was like, she's like put up her leg to stop this guy. And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, you need to get away from her. And he said, we're not trying to hurt her. And I said, you don't understand. I am trying to protect you. And a couple minutes later, she grabbed him and threw him off the back of the thing. And she,
Good for you. Good for her.
Yeah, and she had no memory of it. And it's like, we have not.
I blanked out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did I kill someone?
Seriously. Yeah, really. No, seriously. And so because of the trauma she's had. So we've never been back to one. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
probably better
that kind of thing, you know, seeing that, because I never had that kind of level of trauma in my life. And she's worked really, really hard to overcome it. You know, she's my hero. I'm so proud of her. But seeing that when it does come up is really hard, because it lets me know just how affected she was by the things, not all of which she'll tell me about, just because I'm too soft-hearted and it would haunt me forever. So she tries to protect me from some of that.
You know, on the flip side, her throwing that guy off the ride, I mean, her asking to go on that haunted hayride, there are a lot of people who process their trauma by intentionally seeking out something similar to it in a way that allows them to control. Yeah, but in a way that allows them to be in control.
Right.
And so her, you know, throwing that guy off the hayride, maybe that
if they hadn't
was
touched her. If they hadn't touched her, they'd have been fine.
But I'm saying even the fact that they did, and that she was able to throw him off the ride in a way that might actually have been good for her.
That's true. I'm just glad she didn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
She used to be an EMT. She knows all kinds of ways to hurt people.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Yep. So, especially if she's like, not exactly in a fugue state, but you know, if you're just acting on instinct at that point, who knows what you might do. But she's so kind. I mean, she probably threw him off the ride in the nicest way she possibly could.
It was a controlled throw.
Yes.
Right.
We're done here.
Yeah. So, and the girls, you know, I took them once or twice to some scarier haunted houses. Seeing people be kind, you know, when they see the kids be scared, even just the regular ones that don't have the non-scary option. You know, as an adult, I really appreciated that, because it's about fun.
Right.
And you know, I teach college composition courses in addition to creative writing. So I've had students that work, you know, they're the monsters or whatever in the haunted houses, and reading papers from their point of view about it, how they treat the different people that come in. And of course, they're not necessarily safe either, depending on the reactions of the people that come in. Right. That was really interesting to see that side of Halloween, because it's not something I ever would have experienced if they hadn't talked to me or written about it in their papers.
Any really scary dreams as an adult?
Somebody trying to get into the house when my kids are in there and I've got to protect them. Mm-hmm. That's really scary. You know, I've never been in a fight other than being punched once or twice, like in the stomach or the jaw as a kid. You know, I've never been in a fight. I don't know if, you know, in my mind, I think I would do whatever it would take, but I don't want to find out, because I don't want to either fail or I don't want to hurt somebody.
Right.
My instinct, especially when they were little, was I would kill anyone who tried to hurt my kids, but I just don't know. And so the dreams would be pretty awful. And there never was anybody, ever in those dreams. I never found anybody, because if you found somebody, then you could deal with it. Then you would know what you're dealing with. If you don't find anybody, it's still a possibility. You know, it's like Schrodinger's cat's pretty terrifying if you think about it. Yeah. If you never get the chance to open that box and see.
Yeah. Has there been a time in your adult life when you felt completely calm or safe or bliss?
Well, you know, probably this also goes for when I was younger. We used to have like dachshunds growing up, and being around them was awesome. And then didn't have dogs for a long time. My first wife didn't like them. And then we just happened to rescue a dachshund. And once my wife now saw how I am with dogs, she's like, you need a dog for your psychological health. So, you know, having the little ones like that with me, I'm just at peace with dogs like that. I love being around little kids for similar reasons. They're just so alive in what they are. So I love being around little kids. I feel peace then. Sometimes when I'm teaching, if everything's going well, when I'm writing, even if it's like driving me insane because it's not working, like I'm bashing my head against a brick wall, I still feel at peace. Watching a really good movie, really good horror movie, I feel at peace. I remember once putting on I forget what it was. It was some slasher movie, and I fell asleep to the sweet, sweet sounds of screaming and chainsaws. So, you know, when you're a horror fan, it's hard to explain to people, but stuff like that can be really comforting, because you don't take it seriously the same way people who don't enjoy those kind of movies do. It's different. So there are still times I feel at peace, and getting older helps too. I'm 59 now, and there seems to be a lot of the okay, I'm not 20 and I don't have to worry about dying tomorrow. I've made it to 59 and I've accomplished a lot of what I wanted to do. My kids are grown up, and it's not like I want to check out anytime soon, but
some of the anxiety is gone.
yeah, it's one more there. And yeah, sure, you're getting closer to the end, but you also have a pretty good idea of how things have turned out up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I find myself being at peace a little more often, just in general.
That's good. I'm curious about the thing about the dogs. You said that you love dogs. Just wondering what there is with that brings you such peace.
I feel a connection with them. I like cats, but I don't feel the same kind of connection. And my wife says it's because, growing up in a household that it was really lonely with my mom being, disconnected the way she was, my dad being emotionally disconnected too. He just had no clue how to handle it. And so just didn't. And it was just a strange kind of environment. The three of us kids kind of separated. We were in our rooms a lot. Eventually, I decided that wasn't good, so I just visited each person every day and talked to them in their place. And slowly but surely, we all ended up in the family room. And maybe we didn't talk a lot, but we were together. But then she said, when the dogs were there, I had them because they emotionally relate. They can't help it. And so I had them in a place to kind of emotionally connect to and relate to. And they still do that for me. She says, I don't smile or laugh or anything like I do when I've got a dog with me. So I guess that's just it. They were there when I needed them. And I still connect to them that way.
That I do understand now. My parents divorced when I was about 2.5, and I went to go live with other family members, an aunt and uncle for a while, and then some other stuff happened, so I had to go live with my grandmother. My grandmother was not very emotionally available, but we had a family dog, and there were times where I felt like the dog loved me more than my grandmother did, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I could definitely relate to that. So the next two questions I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask at the same time because it could be the same answer for both, or it could be two different answers. And being more of a literary person, normally we ask movies, but I guess in your case, we could also take books if you'd prefer. But I'll ask it in the sense of movies, and then if you want to choose books, you can do that instead.
Books are optional.
Yeah. I would say, what movie have you watched more times than any other? And what would you say is your favorite movie?
Oh my God, what movie have I seen more times than any other? In the theater was the Blues Brothers.
Really?
We watched that so many times, and I made us all put together our own Blues Brothers tribute band. We had a couple gigs. I got to be old. It was fun. I don't know what about that movie was so cool, but I've seen Halloween so many times, the original one. My oldest daughter loves Halloween. One of my favorite things was when she first started watching movies as a kid, whenever the tension would get to her too much, she would scold the main character, and she'd always give them a middle initial. She'd go, Michael J. Myers, you stop that right now. And I just thought that was so awesome, watching a way to kind of diffuse that. So maybe, Halloween, The Thing's awesome. I've seen that I don't know how many times. All the big Universal horror movies, all the big Hammer horror movies, all the Edgar Allan Poe, sort of Edgar Allan Poe movies that Roger Corman did, loosely adapted. I've seen all those a zillion times. And I often will go through, okay, it's my time to go through all of them again because I haven't seen them for a while. Those are like big movies in my childhood, but I cycle through them. So probably all those.
So that was ones that you've watched more times than any other. How about a favorite?
Oh, I can't pick favorites of anything because it always just shifts. I guess if I had to pick like a favorite, I'd probably, I don't know. I mean, Jaws had the biggest impact on me. Mm-hmm. One of the images that shows up in a lot of my stories is like this. It's like a black hole at the center of all creation that feeds on everything.
The gaping maw.
Yeah, and it was just only like a few weeks ago, I saw this Megalodon toy or whatever, like nice little nature kind of plastic thing. So I ordered it. When I got it, I turned it toward my face and I saw the mouth and I'm like, well, holy shit, that's that image that keeps showing up in my stories. So maybe that one, but maybe The Thing, because it seems almost like it's a perfect horror movie in all kinds of ways. And it's, The Thing is there, but it's all about the people and the pressure on the people. And it's got that element. It's got body horror stuff. It's got can you trust the people closest to you? It's also really imaginative. And got really good imagery. So I like it that way. It's got the super cool, ambiguous ending that you're never, ever going to know, which in a lot of ways is so much closer to real life. I always hate it when they, like in the movie Sinister, which was pretty good until the damn college professor comes along and says, well, the thing that you're dealing with is an ancient god named, like, you would never find that shit out. You would have this thing that was in your life and things would happen, and then you'd never know if you even survived. You wouldn't even know what killed you.
Right.
And so I think in a lot of ways, maybe The Thing would probably be if I had to pick a favorite right now, I guess I'd pick that one.
Okay. Going back to the Blues Brothers, just because it's something different and might raise something interesting. Before I get into that, at least I know that you know what a rubber biscuit is.
Oh yeah, I sang a rubber biscuit.
That was my favorite. My father had the 8-track of the soundtrack of that movie, and for some reason, I loved that song.
This doesn't have anything to do with a game involving circles, does it?
A game of what?
Involving circles, does it?
Not that I'm aware of.
With
biscuits.
I don't know.
Yeah, you lost me.
Yep.
Yeah.
No,
ignore me.
There's a song on the soundtrack. I think it's called Rubber Biscuit, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean there's a rubber biscuit thing that Elwood does. So yeah. I sang it in our
maybe it was like
our little 3-song concert we did.
Yeah. What? Why did you watch that one so much? What did you love about that one?
It was funny. There was energy to it. There was a lot of music, and back at the time, Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi were on Saturday Night Live, and so we watched them there. And so those comedians, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, they were big box office draws for us. I was devastated when John Belushi died. I was driving in my car and heard it on the radio. I still remember. It was like the first kind of, everybody probably has a first celebrity person who has died. Often maybe it's somebody like Kurt Cobain or whatever, musician. But for me, it was John Belushi.
Yeah, I didn't feel hugely emotionally connected to Cobain, but I remember where I was when I found out when I heard.
Yeah.
Normally, this is where we would talk about a summary and then, give you a chance to either tell me I'm right or wrong or point something else out that we've missed. The two things that really seem to be coming up a lot are body horror and vulnerability. There's been a number of other things that have come up, but those two, I think, stand out more than the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you think there's something that we've missed or that you think is bigger.
No, because I think a lot of the things fall under those labels, other things, really well. And vulnerability works great for a horror story because if you're not vulnerable, there's no horror.
Right.
If you put like an Arnold Schwarzenegger type, commando figure up against a monster, like in Predator, it's not a horror story. It's an action story with a monster, which is cool. But, you put you or me up against Predator, we wouldn't last very long. But, it's a horror story because we are vulnerable. So I do think that's a big thing in horror is the vulnerability. The thing that makes a horror story is the vulnerability of at least one of the characters.
Right. And so the natural question then is, do you have any idea why it is that is an important topic to you?
I don't know. I mean, it could be, coming from, having my uncle die so early and being aware that, because it was weird. They tell me this isn't true, but the story that I remember being told is that he went to the doctor for a heart exam. The doctor said he was fine. He went out into the office to pay his bill and died in the waiting room. And they tell me that's not true. So I'm like, where the hell did I get this story? But the fact that the doctor didn't know, couldn't tell you, the doctor gave you a clean bill of health and you couldn't trust the doctor because you just die as soon as you're out there. The kind of weird sort of ironic nature of it. It just how vulnerable you are. And then I almost drowned not too long after that. And then probably growing up in that kind of very emotionally sort of suppressed or distant household. It's just being aware. So your mom, passing out every once in a while, there's just that sense of vulnerability all the time, not really feeling very strong necessarily. And even if you are strong, it doesn't really matter, not against the entire universe. So maybe all those things.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of guessing, but just based on our conversation and what it seems like.
Yeah, no, what you mentioning both the drowning part and the situation with the family, I'd forgotten those as well, but those also support the same things, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next question is why horror? Because aren't you able, or not you personally, but aren't we able to? I don't want to say dig into, but pursue those same topics in other genres. So is there something that horror really stands out to you for?
It stimulates my imagination in a way other things don't, and I think it's because of that idea of the veneer. We don't know, what's out there or what's just beyond what we think of as reality, and just that in and of itself is threatening. I mean, it could be good stuff, but if you like in religious stories, when a messenger of God shows up, people are terrified. And it doesn't, even something, or UFOs come down and you're terrified immediately. So I think that just that kind of response to those kind of things, the things themselves are interesting me, but then the response just seems like very real, as opposed to, oh, UFO, I sure hope they're friends, and you run up there and knock on the door, come on out, friends, we'd love to meet you. So maybe that, I mean, there's a catharsis too of, I am going to go in there and dig into the things that are bothering me, that are churning inside me, work with them, look at them, play with them. And of course, if you do that, you're controlling them on a certain level, especially if you arrange words onto a page and ideas into an order, and then you're all finished and it's done and you send it off. I mean, it's almost like putting a genie in a bottle, so you take these dangerous genies and decant them, put a cork in them, and then put it up on the shelf, and you're at least one more genie's gone. But of course, it never lasts. The genie gets out
just
again.
Just going to say, at least for the day,
do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cork always goes. You got to put the genie back in.
Yeah.
So maybe all of that. It's a lot like therapy. I mean, my wife's not a horror person, but she loves going to horror convention because of how nice everybody is and how kind and sweet and caring. And it's true. I mean, it's a cliche, but people outside the community don't understand that. I think it's because we deal with a lot of things that, on the outside, everybody thinks we're mentally unbalanced, but we're probably the most mentally healthy people that you'd want to find in a lot of ways.
It's kind of a big part of what this show is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. I mean, there's what you might be saying there in terms of horror fans being healthy because they've dug into all the shit. And then the question is, but why are you digging into the shit in the first place? Which is
I guess that's
part of the reason for the call. Well, I like what you said about the veneer and the unknown, because if you think about that alone, if you think about any other genre, once you bring up the topic of that veneer, it kind of turns into horror because
right.
You think about a rom-com and then you've got, who's this person behind the face? There's an element of horror there. I mean, like I say, multiple other genres. Once you bring in that, and it's the unknown,
Yeah, like in Star Trek, if the very first time they had the Romulans in the original one, they'd never seen a Romulan before, just their ships. And if they'd never seen one, you don't know what they are or can do. But most Star Trek, it's like, oh, here's this person that looks like us with pointed ears. We say hi and, oh, we're okay. It's like there's no veneer. Once you get to know them, they're not scary at that point. But when it could be anything, it's like about the Schrodinger's box thing. When it could be anything in there, that's when it's frightening. It's like the difference between Alien and Aliens. The first one, we didn't know anything about the alien, but the second one, we know everything. Yeah. And so even though it's a really great movie, it's not a horror movie. Right. It's a movie with horror elements, but it's an action-adventure movie. Yeah. I love them both, but they're different.
Of it. Yeah. It does make it more of an action movie simply by the fact that the villain and the threat.
Right. Yeah, we've got people that think they can handle it. We know they can't, but their attitude, they're not scared the same way that Ripley was on the Nostromo in the first movie.
Right. Mm-hmm. Experience changes things.
Yep.
So last question, is there anything relevant that you can think of that hasn't come up on the call, or maybe a chance to, if there was something you thought of earlier and then the conversation took a left turn?
No, I can't. We were talking about just in general, like the sort of mental health aspect of it. I mean, the cliche, and I guess it's backed up by sales figures for books and, profits for movies, is that horror does really well in bad times. So in good times, not so much. So it does, people do need to to find something, some measure of control or some way of facing these things. And I've said this a million times, but it's like you can't look at an eclipse directly. It's too strong. But you can look at it indirectly. Like they used to have you make the little 2 cards with a pinhole, and you could watch the shadow, or whatever, turn into like a half shadow or something. And you could sort of watch the eclipse that way. And I think horror works that way. I think horror allows us to indirectly face stuff, almost like a buffer on a computer where it can filter things through enough that it doesn't overwhelm us or hit us all at once. And I think it's one of the great things that it can do. I also tell people that I thought of this after 9/11 when people on the HW message board were like, what's the point of us writing horror? And I'm like, we don't write stuff that really deals with horror. You know that, right? We're like rodeo clowns. We stand in front of the real darkness seriously, we stand in front of the real darkness to distract people from it in a lot of ways. Because you're like, oh, look, here's Jason. It's not, a horrible cancer or horrible disease or a horrible car wreck or, just another person that just doesn't like you and wants to hurt you. It's this horrible force that, will come to get you because death shows up in person to get you because you're special. You get this wonderful cinematic death that, is fake and entertaining, as opposed to just, being in hospice for 9 months or something. I think it really helps in a lot of ways. So that sort of buffering effect, along with that clown effect. I don't think they call them clowns anymore. Rodeo clowns. I forget what they're called. But the basic idea where you distract from the danger for somebody else.
I really like that analogy. That I've never heard that before, but I like that.
Yeah, it just seems to me the way it works. So I think there's a lot horror does for people, and I think that in a lot of ways, probably all kinds of stories help in all kinds of different ways. But I think horror can help in a way that is probably pretty unique to the genre.
The other thing that I was thinking of while you were talking there, I was refreshing my memory by going through the handout that you gave out during your panel at StokerCon, and on one of the pages, you've got a breakdown of a number of the different possible ways that a horror story's hero can. I can't think of the right word at the moment, but a couple different outcomes. And just previously, earlier in the day, I had been having a conversation with an ex-girlfriend of mine who's been through some tough shit herself. And I was amused because in the conversation I was having with her, she self-identified as a bitch, frankly, because of some of the things that she's gone through. But it's funny because then not too long later, I'm going through this list of these outcomes, and I realized that part of the reason that I've never thought of her as a bitch is because I guess in some way I had always seen her as being a horror of her own, a hero of her own horror stories, and I was identifying her in a number of those different outcomes. And I don't know how that exactly ties in with any of the things that you just said, but what you said triggered that thought in me.
Yeah, because there's so many different endings. I mean, there's so much different kind of catharsis that can happen. And the other thing about horror that's cool is that horror fans always get happy endings. So, it doesn't matter whether the hero survives or the monster eats them. We're happy either way. It's always good.
Even if it's one of those grim, dark, you didn't see that coming ending, it's still...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think more the point there is that everybody's lives have multiple story arcs overlapping all the time. And when you say that there are multiple endings, there's different endings to different story arcs, but we're experiencing many of them simultaneously because each different story or each different scenario in our life is ending in different ways, but they all combine. But that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. Well, the hero's journey doesn't allow that. It only allows for one outcome if you follow it, pretty strictly.
Well, there's always that saying of you live long enough to, or see yourself become the thing. And that's what happens after the hero story ends is, either you do something good with it, but if you don't do something good with it, then you become the evil, and then the new hero has to rise to what you've become. The story does continue, it just changes. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I mean, we've been talking for an hour, almost 2 hours now. It's lot of interesting stuff has come up. I think the real meat of the conversation for you, like you say, it's a lot about vulnerability and digging into that, which, like you say, you can't really do outside of horror without addressing some of the depth. Because, like I mentioned earlier with the veneer, once you bring that into it, that kind of changes things.
Right. Well, thanks so much for having me. This is great. I had a great time.
My pleasure. Actually, before we hit the closing, after the fact, we realized that we had forgotten to give Tim a spot to let us know what he was currently working on. I talked with him about that offline, and he just said to refer everyone to his website, timwaggoner.com. We'll also have a link to that on his bio page on our site. And with that, back to the closing. Thank you again to you and to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormixushappy.com. We've got a list of people there that we're looking to interview. If you can help us get in touch with any of those people, let us know. If you'd like to have somebody added to the list, let us know. There's links there to our Discord, Twitch. You can buy us coffee, support us on Patreon, buy merch, all kinds of fun stuff. So come check us out.